Mr. Baskin, and after Mr. Baskin will be Mr. Brian Brennan. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Maurice Baskin. I'm a partner in the Washington, D.C. office of the Venable Law Firm, and I'm appearing before you today on behalf of Associated Builders and Contractors, the National Construction Industry Trade Association for Merit Shop Contractors, representing 23,000 contractors around the country, employing an estimated 2 million workers. With me today is Karen Livingston, Director of Federal Policy for ABC. ABC is strongly opposed to the board's proposed amendments to the election rules, both as they impact the unique labor relations of the construction industry and also as they impact on small businesses generally, because small businesses comprise the majority of ABC's members. But from listening to the testimony you've heard so far, I'm not sure that you've been given a full appreciation of the sense of outrage in the business community, particularly small businesses who we're hearing from, that in the midst of this terrible economy, the NLRB is proposing new and burdensome regulations that appear to have no purpose other than to promote union organizing. There's outrage over the haste with which you are moving ahead with these sweeping and radical proposals, hardly modest proposals, radical proposals, particularly without a full board of confirmed members, and with no credible showing of a need for changes in the board's election rules in the first place. Unions in the construction industry last year won 81% of their NLRB elections in a median time of a little over a month. It appears to many in the business community that the unions and the board won't be satisfied until that number hits 100%. And it looks to small businesses like the proposed amendments are simply an end run by the board to achieve what the unions failed to get through Congress last year. Now, regardless of the board's motivations, the proposed amendments are unlawful on their face because they're based on two false premises. First, that faster elections are necessarily fairer elections. And second, that employers' rights to due process and free speech during the union election campaigns are somehow subordinate to the rights of unions to organize the employer's workplace. I'm afraid we don't have nearly enough time today for us to cover everything that's wrong with the proposed amendments, but I want to try to focus on those parts that threaten particular harm to the construction industry, who we're representing here today, along with small businesses generally. So we start with the proposed shortening of the period between the filing of the union petition and the NLRB hearing. It's particularly offensive to small businesses in the construction industry. The new 7-day time limit, not enough time for most small construction contractors or other small businesses to get lawyers, as you've already heard, or learn what the NLRB election is or what the NLRB is, frankly, let alone produce this new legally binding pre-hearing statement of position on what the issues are. I should add that the board's proposal is as different from the federal rules of civil procedure as night and day. It takes months to reach the point of disclosures and binding statements and definitions of hearings and what's permissible and what's not, what the board is trying to achieve in 7 days. It's just completely different. We'll give you chapter and verse on that in our written comments, as I'm sure many others will. But really, it was shocking to see that statement in the proposed rule discussion. The board's appropriate unit rules, just take those for the construction industry, they are particularly convoluted. I've yet to meet a contractor faced with their first union election who has any idea what those rules are or how they work. And I appreciate the concept of, well, if the board could just put out a little advanced statement, that would help. Are you going to put out a treatise this thick? And just imagine if you're a small business employer and you get an envelope in the mail that says not only are your employees mad at you and they brought a union in, but here's this homework assignment. Go study up, get ready to go to law school to learn all the appropriate unit rules in the construction industry. And of course, for other industries, small businesses face the same problem. It's crazy that they would be bound within 7 days to figure out while they're trying to find lawyers, while they're trying to figure out who's actually in their group of employees so they can produce this pre-hearing statement, to figure out the rules of disappearing units, of multi-craft versus single-craft units, of single employer versus joint employers, of 8F, not to mention in the construction industry, which is unique, and 9A separation. These are just a few of the issues that arise in the construction industry that need to be addressed up front with sufficient time to get the facts and the law straight. Not to mention that the board has created a special rule of eligibility in the construction industry, the Daniel Steiny formula. And we haven't had much talk about the Excelsior list change, knocking it down to 2 days. How construction employers are supposed to put that together? Finding laid-off employees, that's the Daniel Steiny rule, unusual to construction. So it's not just a matter of pulling out your latest payroll and submitting that. No, you've got to go back and find the people who were laid off over and who worked a sufficient period of time to perform, to be included on the eligibility list. We submit that that's impossible. Frankly, it's impractical for other industries as well, and no justification for that shortened timetable. Construction companies employ an unusually large number of working foremen, and we've heard talk about the difficulties of trying to figure out whether lead men and foremen are supervisors or not, and the impact of the election, so I won't repeat that here, except to say that the construction industry faces that problem more than most other industries. So these are just a few of the issues raised by the proposed amendments that are likely to have negative impacts. We're going to provide more details in our written comments, but we again implore you to slow down. We renew our request for additional time for all interested parties to file their written comments, and we urge you to rethink the wisdom of attempting to implement this radical new agenda that violates the Act. Thanks for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Baskin. Other
I've got a question about your view of the terminology that we adopted in establishing, I think, all the time frames that have been proposed, not only the 7 days, but the 2 days, both of which you mentioned specifically, because we specifically asked for comments on the words that we've used to describe those time frames, none of which are rigid. Because, as I'm sure you know, in 2002, a board, none of us were on, and Croft Metals held the following, and I'll quote, "By providing parties with at least 5 working days notice, that is between petition and hearing, we make certain that parties to representation cases avoid the Hobson's choice of either proceeding unprepared on short notice or refusing to proceed at all." So however many years ago, 9 years ago, the board held that that period of time was the minimum period necessary. What the proposal suggests is that period should be the standard, but not rigidly. And we've suggested in all the time frames special circumstances or various language to accommodate the kinds of concerns you've described. If you have to go back and figure out who was working over various periods of time, that may justify a longer period of time. So my question is, do you have any specific suggestions as to that terminology? That is, if we're going to establish a norm, maybe it's 7 days, maybe it's 10 days, but terminology which would allow for the kinds of special circumstances you've described as to those time frames.
First, there's been no need to make the change in the first place, so your established practices are working well and you should continue them and not change the norm, which is going to invite litigation over every aspect of these rules, including that one. Second, what you describe as language that is not rigid seems inconsistent with the board's own fact statements and summaries of the rules. When one looks at the chart that appears on your website, it doesn't emphasize the non-rigid nature. It says there's going to be this new rule, and it's going to be a shorter period of time. But we'll take your question to heart, and we'll provide comments in our written statement as to whether there is any way that you could change the rules with a more open period. But frankly, we doubt it, and we don't see why you need to do it.
Mr. Baskin, you mentioned the question of employer free speech, and I would ask you the question I asked just a little while ago. I assume most of the members are pretty small employers.
Yes.
And I wonder if there is a kind of standard practice that is employed in situations where unions file a petition, and what do employers routinely do to try to exercise their free speech and get their views across, and how long does that take?
Well, I'm very glad you asked that, because there's been this myth created that employers are some monolithic group out there with this game plan in place to stop unions and to communicate. In fact, most employers, especially smaller ones, don't give the slightest thought to this issue. Even though seminars are out there being given, they're not all that well attended. Until the employer has the union at the door, then they wake up and they realize they should do something about this, only they don't have the slightest idea what to do. And there are various recommendations on what they should do. They have to get time to consider those possibilities. There's also a language barrier in many construction workplaces because of a sizable representation of minorities. So they have to figure out how they're even going to communicate. It's one thing to say, go here, put this together with people who already know how to do it. It's another thing to get into this very complicated subject of union rights and benefits, and the benefits of staying non-union. So there really is not a single standard. Many employers are not even members of the associations that try to educate. Among the better educated ones are the ones who are members of ABC and similar groups. But to many others, they just are completely at sea when they get this, and frankly, they're more likely to commit violations because of the time pressures and the lack of education on what they should do in this situation.
I would assume that one of the advantages of membership in the ABC is that you do provide some guidance and probably have kind of model plans for how the employer gets it across. I'm just curious, really, what the time frame is for a model campaign that the ABC would recommend.
I think that
especially with a small law.
There is no standard recommendation, because every workplace is different. The issues are different, but I would say that the median that the board is currently at is about right. In fact, it's about the minimum, because below that, it is not likely that the employer is going to be able to communicate.
Thank you. Thank you for being here with us today and for your contribution.
Thank you.